Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Empower You. Welcome to all of you that are online. I'm really impressed that so many of you braved this weather to come out. I hope you get home okay. They're talking about ice some places, and I hope none of you are headed that way. This is our 23rd semester, and somebody told me on Wednesday that we had a really great schedule planned. Well, I thought we did. I hope you do. I'm sure all of you have seen it. If you don't have a calendar, we do have them on the table on the back, so be sure and pick up one before you leave. If you want to pick up some to give to somebody else, that's good too. Next Tuesday, we are going to have the power of interpersonal forgiveness. That is going to be a virtual only class, so we will not be in the studio. Our speaker's in North Dakota, so it was a little far for him to drive to get here. But this class is on forgiveness. We've never had a class like that before, so we're kind of excited about it. You know, we're living in a time when there's so much chaos and people are getting angry at people they know and people they don't know. And I think there's probably a lot of forgiveness that needs to go on. So he's going to teach us understanding and giving us some insight in what it is to go through the forgiveness process, what it is and what it isn't, and the effects on your well-being of forgiving. So I personally think forgiving benefits the person that forgives more than the person that's getting the forgiveness. I could be wrong, but that's my thoughts on it. Then next Thursday, we will be back in the studio, and we're going to have impacting elected officials through the power of storytelling. Ray Hoskins with the Americans for Prosperity will be here teaching that class. I don't know about you, but I sometimes have a short memory. But if you tell me a story and you want me to remember it, I'm going to remember it. So I really like the idea of them communicating with our legislators. Does that work with you, Jennifer, for storytelling? So that's what that class will be about that night. And then also that evening, Kim Georgeton, who is running for state rep in District 28, will be here that night. So she's never run for politics before. She's brand new. So if you're in her district, be sure and come out and meet her. If you're not in her district, come out and meet her anyway, because I think, you know, Jennifer's the author of HB 248, and she didn't do that for just District 45. She did that for all of us. So anyway, I hope you'll come to that class. And then on Tuesday, March 8th, we're out of the studio again. We're going over to White Oak Gardens, and we're going to start learning what we're going to put in our yards this year. So that's always a fun class. It's usually well attended. It's a little bit far for some of you to go, I know, but I hope you'll consider coming to that one. And also, I just want to remind you, when we get to the question part of our class, if you're in the studio, please raise your hand and wait for one of us to bring you a microphone. If you're not speaking in a microphone, the people online can't hear you, and the people behind you can't hear you either. And for those of you online, if you just go down to the bottom of your screen where there's a Q&A button, you can put your question in there for our speakers. And also, Empower You is a free university. We are powered only by donations. So we appreciate any donations that you give to us. If you'd like to donate something, there's several ways you can do that. When you sign up for a class, there's a donate button on the registration page. There's also a donate button on our website. If you don't like to give money that way and you still want to give something, you can mail it to us, and our address is on our website. We also, of course, pass our little red buckets around here in the studio. So if you feel like you want to give something, we do appreciate it. And our first speaker for this evening is going to be Jennifer Gross. She is currently serving her first term in the Ohio House of Representatives. She represents the 52nd District. Is that right? Okay, I thought it was 45. I was confused when I read that. It includes Westchester Township, Liberty Township, Fairfield Township, and part of Sharonville and Butler County. She is a 21-year Air Force veteran and retired lieutenant colonel who served our great nation in Saudi Arabia during Operation Provide Comfort, and in Sarajevo during Operation Provide Promise. Gross retired from the military in 2008. She is currently a member of American Legion Post 681 and VFW Post 7696, where she became the first active female inductee in February 2019. Representative Gross has been a family nurse practitioner for over 16 years and a registered nurse for over 30 years. Prior to becoming an NP, she managed a $3 million territory for Eli Lilly. She most recently participated as a sub-investigator for Operation Warp Speed, developing treatments to help battle COVID-19. She also currently manages small business as a health coach. Representative Gross believes in strong public policy that supports Ohio business success, legislation which supports and protects the unborn and will uphold Ohioans' constitutional freedoms. She resides in Westchester with her husband, Chris, and their 2 sons. Jennifer, if you'd come up, please.
Well, hey, everybody. Wow. Is that okay? A little bit of feedback there. How are you? Good? You guys, I just want to take, and everybody online, wherever you are, you're like in the cloud. I just want to take an opportunity to thank all of you for being here because, you know, it's a wet night. It's just really nasty, but you know, for those of you here and also online, to take your time to listen, to learn, to actually grow and activate yourselves as a citizen. But also, I want to remind you also about Dan. Dan, as I was reading about him, I remember the years of, we were talking about this earlier, but you know, Dan fought the fight of eminent domain. And, you know, even today we have, you know, an issue in Butler County that may be arising with eminent domain. And that was the only thing, I mean, our president 45 was for eminent domain. That was, you know, an issue that I had, but Dan is really, he's fought the law and he's won and he's beat it. And he devotes his life by providing Empower You and all these classes and with Betty as well to educate and keep us moving forward. So thank you very much. All right. So raise your hands if you believe that mandates and freedom can coexist. Anybody online raising their hands? No, they can't. They can't. Can you? You know, I stand on a scripture verse. I hope you guys don't mind my saying, but where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Everything that drives me as a legislator is liberty and freedom. And, you know, two of my favorite quotes. One is from Harriet Tubman. She said, "I will either live or I will die." And then Patrick Henry says, "Give me liberty or give me death." And that's the kind of legislator that I am. And that's what drives me every day in the State House. And I may sound like a Pollyanna, but I have my brother in the back there that's a veteran. And it really is true that I never resigned my commission as a military officer, and I didn't when I went to Columbus. And so I'll keep fighting for this country. It does bear reminding, though, on this very somber day, only less than 24 hours due to the Russian aggression in Ukraine, that the soldier is the one who hates war the most. It is the soldier that knows the price of war. And I do believe, and will say publicly, that I believe that this war could have been prevented. It is because of a weak president that this country has stepped forward and done this. Of course, that's out of my wheelhouse since I'm just a state rep. But anyway, so if you had to get I'm moving on. If you had to get an exemption in your job, then you are only one step away from your state and your government now taking the rest of your freedom. For you to have to go to your employer and say, please, pretty please give me an exemption and let me work. That is one step away from freedom. Ohio HB 248, the Vaccine Choice Anti-Discrimination Act, is a bill that I introduced in April of 2021. I felt like Noah. Remember, Noah's building this boat and everybody's like, you're nuts, you know, and he's like, it's going to rain, it's going to rain. I don't know if you guys know the story, but basically it's going to rain. It hasn't rained for 100 years. And I'm like, guys, we need to look at this. This is not good. We need to protect freedom. It's my job. I'm a state legislator. We got to preserve liberty and freedom. Like, oh, you don't have to worry about mandates. That's not going to happen. They're not going to force vaccines. Well, it all happened. The bill protected your liberties that you had 2 years ago. So you never had to tell, unless you were in healthcare, you never had to tell anybody that you got a shot to work at a manufacturing, to work at a grocery store, to work at a bank. Every single one of these places in our region today, some of these people and some of these companies are charging higher premiums. They're discriminating against the unvaccinated. And then if you get COVID from a vaccinated person, a bank that I know of, which I won't mention, charges the person who is not vaccinated who gets COVID PTO, but the one who got vaccinated that gets COVID gets to take sick leave. That's the type of discrimination that HB 248 would have prevented. In its sub-bill form, it was the strongest bill in all of the United States. In Ohio, this bill, and I want you to hear me really well, 1,350 Ohioans proponent testimony, so supported the bill, traveled hours all over the state to come in and give testimony. 1,350 Ohioans testified for this bill, the most in the history of any bill that I know of Ohio, in 6 months. And then there were 100 people whose testimonies were denied by the chairman. So if you add those together, I round up, I'm going to say 1,500 Ohioans testified for HB 248. Do you think Ohio wants the bill? I do. I mean, it's shocking to me, right? So they all drove, and then 3 weeks after I gave testimony, so up until that point, OSHA said you got the shot, you got injured, or you had some side effects for 12 to 24 hours. That was a reportable safety event through OSHA. 3 weeks after I gave testimony in Ohio, they changed to say that it was no longer a reportable safety event if your employer forced you to get the shot. But I was, as a freshman, and I have to be somewhat confident, but I want you to know that I do not puff myself up, and I try to remain very humble. Even at that time, I was really naive and thinking, well, was it me? Was it my testimony? I suspect now that it was, because there is a saying, you guys know it. What do we say? As Ohio goes, so goes the nation. What do you think if Ohio passed the strongest medical freedom bill in the nation? Where do you think we'd be today? What do you think would have happened? And so I choose to believe, and here's what I know, we must keep fighting. So because your legislature was unable to hear 1,500 voices, the people have now decided that you're going to provide your own freedom. I was telling Dan earlier, I think we ought to have to hand back half our salaries this year, because I'm not so sure you got your money's worth out of your legislature. I mean, what did we provide for you? We did rein in the governor with SB 22. We did do the Business Fairness Act, which was HB 215, which means the governor cannot shut down businesses at all, no matter what size, for any amount of time. We passed 218, which a lot of people don't like, but here's the deal. It only passed the House. I already hear it's not going to pass the Senate, and the governor wouldn't sign it anyway. So you really got nothing. The House had a big celebration, and you guys got nothing. So the people, and a brave woman named Diana Smith, wonderful, wonderful gal, not a politician, she stepped forward and has organized 3 times to get this on the ballot. And 3 times AG Yost has denied it to be put on the ballot. So this past weekend, I was at the Reawaken America tour with Clay Clark and some, General Flynn and those people. And we got almost 1,000 signatures. Every single time we take the ballot initiative in, we have to get 1,000 signatures. So we get about 2,000 to be sure, because the last time AG Yost denied it, he said we didn't have valid signatures. The time before that, the wording was wrong. They even got an attorney last time. So now we're going back the 4th time. If we do not get it approved this time, it will not make it on the ballot. The people are getting exasperated, and that's where you come in. If we do get it on the ballot, we're going to need 133,000 signatures, and we're going to need you guys to take some petitions and make that happen. And this is and it really is just to preserve your right to say, I don't want to get a substance in my body. A lot of people made fun of me, and they said, oh, the mask, you're making a big deal, it's a slippery slope, nah, nah, nah. And then we went from the mask mandate to, remember this? Hey, remember if you were standing, you had to wear a mask, but if you were seated, you didn't. You remember that? Or if you were in a group, you guys got 10 people there, you're going to have to split up. Do you remember that? Do you remember those absurd rules? So that's what SB 22 did. But medical freedom is this: you get to decide. And so this ballot initiative, the HB 248 ballot initiative, gets the bill that we could not pass, that we were not able to discharge, out of the House. That means you can pull a bill out of a committee when the committee refuses to move it out, get it to the floor if you get 50 signatures. So let me look at my notes here, because I don't want to really get completely off track. If your legislature cannot support your medical freedom, then you now have to step in and do it. And you've got to keep an eye, no matter who your legislator is in Ohio. I would argue, even me, even my constituents, because some are here, you have to keep us on track at every time. And no longer can you turn away and just grab a slate card and walk in and vote. Those days are gone. We have a swamp because we did that. We all did. We all did. So do you know how I know we have to keep fighting? Because I went to Arlington in December last year, and my brothers and sisters are in Arlington dead. If we don't stand for liberty and freedom, who's going to do it? And their lives were lost in vain, right? I mean, if we don't stand for freedom, then what was the point of it all, right? So, that's basically, that's HB 248 and where we are with HB 248. 14 people signed the discharge petition. What happens with the bill is, if you can't get it out of committee, gradually, I think leadership peeled off some of my yes votes to the point where we couldn't get it out of committee. And then they started telling them, then we got a letter from the Ohio Chamber of Commerce saying, if you vote on this bill, you'll get 2 negative votes on your record. We also got a letter from leadership, all of leadership, which includes Cupp, Seitz, Abrams, Ginter, Carfagna, who's now gone to the chamber, and I'm missing one. But anyway, they all agreed to say that that they did not want the House or the members to sign on to the discharge petition to get it to the floor for a vote. I ended up with 14 signatures on that. I needed 50. It's not too late. The bill's not dead. They'll tell you it's dead. It's not dead. They can still put it on the ballot and get it out, and we could vote on it. However, the Senate won't move it, and the governor says he won't sign it. So in order to make that happen, it has to be veto proof, and that's not going to happen. So the ballot initiative is the best way to go to keep moving forward so that you have freedom. So the second thing we were going to talk about is what does it look like for a person who wants to run for the Ohio House of Representatives? And I would say the first thing is, first and foremost, they have to focus on liberty and freedom. Number one. And I mean, it's kind of trite to say that, right? It's kind of trite to oh, well, everybody's going to say that, but that's what I mean. They have to be a non-career politician person. I really cringe when I meet a young person like, oh, I'm going to get my master's in political science and I want to be a politician. I'm like, ugh, you need to have some life experience. You heard my resume: veteran, combat, nurse practitioner, nurse, been doing that, managed a $3 million territory. Don't hold that against me. Prozac was a great drug. But you need to have some life experience. That would be my, preference. I think if you're a new grad, you're 24, 25, 26, you can do it, but really your world experience matters. So you have to be willing to pass on the baton. If I stay for 8 years, I'll be about 64 by the time I'm done. And I think that's appropriate. I think you serve and you get tired. If you're really serving hard, you're going to work hard, you're going to run hard, you're going to do the best you can. You find the person that you hope maybe would carry that baton on for liberty, but it can't be the establishment rhino types. And through all of what I've seen, and 248 has taken me throughout the state, here's what I know. Ohio is red. We are solid red, but your legislature, they're purple. That's why we can't pass a Save Women's Sports Act, HB 61, with Jenna Powell. I mean, come on, guys, girls are girls, boys are boys, or we could have a co-ed team if we want to be one or the other, right? But we can't have men competing against women in women's sports. I mean, it's crazy, but anyway, so it's truly troubling that the rhinos come in and they're very self-promoting. It's hard to, it's really hard to be a person sitting there looking. You can look through their donations, but look, I take donations. But I was telling somebody tonight, you know, I was thinking, what would Thomas Jefferson say to me? Remember, Thomas Jefferson died penniless. He didn't lose Monticello, which is a really nice place, right? But he didn't take a dime from the federal government. And I thought, God, what are you asking of me? What is my Jefferson equivalent? Well, I'm a nurse practitioner. I just got a job I'm onboarding now for a telemedicine company. And I thought if I could take everything I earn from my second job and my little small business too, my health coaching business, and put it into my campaign fund, then when you see donations or you choose to give me a donation, and you should donate to good conservatives. Don't just donate when you get the little, you know, repeat mailer, you know, in the mail. You know, and I heard we were talking tonight, and you know, really be thinking who's endorsing who. So that's why endorsements matter. But anyway, I digress. So you've got to look at where they're getting their money, but you also have to understand that true conservatives have to take donations too. There is no way you can look at someone like Kim Georgeson. She's running, she's the underdog, but I'll tell you, she's a great liberty fighter. And you don't necessarily look at who's endorsed or not. I'm very proud of my endorsement with Butler County. I am very proud. I earned it, and I am so thankful to be representing. I'm very honored to have the endorsement. So just because they have an endorsement doesn't mean they're bad, but that's where you guys come in. You have got to do your homework. You've got to look at the person. I think, you know, you have to have the ability as a legislator to have, you know, maintain your beliefs, but also listen to people, have an element of empathy with the people that you're working with. But you also, for instance, I'm a nurse practitioner, and we're probably going to legalize marijuana in some fashion. And you may say, oh, and I've pretty much been against it. We have HB 60 that wants to give medical marijuana to autism spectrum disorder children. But I got to tell you something, what does marijuana fall under? And what do some of the doctors like that I was listening to this weekend speak about? Marijuana has anti-inflammatory processes and anti-inflammatory properties. It was removed because of the change from homeopathic to allopathic medicine back during the Rockefeller time. So we need to go back and look. So marijuana will fall under commerce instead of pharma. So you need to remain open. And for me, when I talk to a nurse who's dealing with children who they're putting on pads and then helmets and all that stuff, and they say, well, I'd rather give medical marijuana to a child like this instead of Haldol and all those really terrible drugs, you have to remain open to go, okay, maybe I should listen. I'm not saying what way I'm going yet on these bills. What I'm telling you is I thought that I was adamantly opposed, and now I'm listening, I'm hearing. And I think that you've got to remain open. I don't know what I'm going to vote that way, but on those bills, but I will tell you that I remain open, and I think you've got to be able to hear. You've got to have a calling. Lastly, I would say, you know, I really want people in the Ohio House of Representatives with me that sometimes will duke it out. We won't always agree. That's the way a representative government is. But in order to fight for liberty and freedom, you have got to put the needs of the people and the people you represent at the first and the foremost of your priorities. I could not represent a Democrat district because I'm not a Democrat. I don't stand for those things, adamant leftist socialism, blah. I am a freedom fighter. I hope that my district, which will soon be Westchester, Fairfield City, Ross Township, and Morgan Township, that my district chooses to elect me. If they don't, I will support whoever they do. But I tell you this, I will continue to fight for liberty and freedom for you. And even if you can't vote for me, I will stand. And I will continue to stand until my very last breath, because on my watch, freedom is not going to die. So I thank you very much. I don't know how much time I've taken, but I think my time is up.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got time for maybe a quick question for Jennifer. Anybody have one that they want to ask? Anybody right over here?
Hi, my name's David.
Hi, David.
Hi. You're referring to about, being required to get the shot to work and whatnot. Where does HIPAA come in? I thought that was to protect us.
So HIPAA, remember that I'm a provider and say he's a provider. Together, we're allowed to talk about your medical information because we're in the same office. But if I go over to her and she's at Kroger and I'm your provider and I talk to her about your medical information, that's illegal and it goes against HIPAA. If you go to your employer and you take your medical information, you've given it to them. There was no compromise of HIPAA in that case because it wasn't two providers sharing your private medical information with a stranger. You gave your medical information to them. Now, I understand they're saying you have to, but you don't. You don't have to give it to them. You can lose your job. And what they've done, that's coercion. You either give me your medical information. I have an IT guy that he said, I'm not going to get it. I'm not, because I know that I'm going to go on a registry. That's a national registry. And I'm not getting the shot. They have no reason to know, but I don't want that information on the registry. The guy said, you have to say yes or no. You don't have to get the shot, but you got to tell us yes or no. And he said, I'm not putting either. And so he got fired simply because he wouldn't tell them yes or no. He got fired. In Ohio, it's called, we're an at-will state. And that's where the chamber and we go back and forth. Whose will, whose liberty trumps whose? Does a business liberty and the freedom to choose whether you're vaccinated, is that your employer's liberty to choose? Or is it your medical freedom, individual liberty? People say to me, yeah, well, they can quit. We needed everybody to get the shot for our business model and we couldn't be manufacturing and blah, blah, blah. Well, now we know that the shots don't prevent transmission and stuff. So I've been fighting for that freedom for you all along. And I was right.
Let's thank Jennifer for coming in tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great seeing you again.
Thank you.
So one take, I'm Dan Reginald, by the way. It's good to see you. It's great to be back and empower you. It's great to see everybody online tonight. And we've got a very good crowd. And somebody important handed me this note and he said, there's two people that are online tonight. Could you say hi to Bill and Carol? Could everybody say hi, Bill and Carol? We're glad to have you, Bill and Carol. I hope you enjoy the session. So I took one quote from something that Jennifer said, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And that's something great to remember. And when we talk about the Ohio legislature, boy, I spent so much time trying to work with them last year with just so few results. It's kind of astounding to me how little got done. And I think as citizens, we have to ask ourselves, are these people that we're electing, are they going to work for us, the citizens, or are they going to work for the Chamber of Commerce and for the big donors? And that's a message we have to send, or we're going to have another legislature for the next 2 years that doesn't do anything. And we need more people like this. Let's give her another round of applause. So I'm thrilled you're here. We've got a couple giveaways tonight. The first giveaway we're going to do, we're going to give away to somebody online, and we're going to give, with so much talk about authoritarians out there, like the government up north and a lot of other people. This is Ben Shapiro's newest book, The Authoritarian Moment, and this goes to Derek C., who's online tonight. So Derek, congratulations. We'll get this book to you. Give him a round of applause. And then this is our book we're going to give away for everybody who's here tonight. And this is our class. It's a virtual only class. It's going to be next Tuesday. And I've got to tell you, this book is outside my comfort zone. The Path to Forgiveness. It's just a little bit out there, but I actually had a window of time, and I'm through about 60 pages of the 80 pages. It is a fantastic book. I think for those of you who are a little nervous about taking a class like this, I just urge you to just throw yourself out there on Tuesday night, and I think you're going to learn something. We've also got Tom Z with us, who's a great activist from up north, who's going to talk to us about the Senate race that's taking place. So get your tickets out. I'm going to ask our speaker to draw a ticket. And that ticket is, last three numbers, number 030. 030. Do we have a winner? 030. Oh no. Oh no. Let's 030. Let's try, no, let's try one more. How about 021? Ah, okay. Yeah, so that goes to Jan right there. Let's give Jan a round of applause. Thank you. Congratulations. Couple quick things before we get started. Betty told you about the printed schedule. Please give one to a friend. We'd love to see them. I've got a required reading article that Mr. Bill Roll in the back will hand out to you called Bills Seek a Closer Look at Schools. This talks about what's going on in Indiana right next door to us. Sarah Fowler Arthur, who is a colleague of Jennifer Gross, has just released a new edition of a combination bill for critical race theory, backpack bill, curriculum transparency. I think it's all in the same bill. I haven't read it yet. I've asked Sarah to come on Empower You and talk about it for 10 minutes. I haven't heard back from her. I hope to, but Bill will hand you this out when you leave. Did any of you have a chance to watch our interesting class on whether the Ohio Republican Party is corrupt? A few of you watched it. If you want some good drama, you should watch the replay. It was pretty good, I think. So a compelling case was made by two members of the Ohio State Central Committee that there was corruption going on. And you know, the Republican Party wasn't very happy that I did the class. They threatened me. They had a lawyer threaten me that they would sue me and do all sorts of bad things. That's online if you want to see it. So after this class was done, somebody from the Ohio Republican Party, a gentleman by the name of Brian Williams from Summit County, which is up north, came forward and said, you know, I spoke at Empower You 10 years ago. So there aren't many people that have been around for 10 years of Empower You classes. And he said, I'd like to come on and not necessarily and tell you that I don't think the Republican Party is corrupt, but I think there are some things we need to work on. So he'll be here on March 17th, the second part of the class. And I think it's going to be super interesting to hear the other side of that story. So for those of you who are Republicans, that'll be March 17th, the same day we talk about childhood trauma. So on to our featured speaker tonight. Michael Mercier is the founder and president of Screen Education, which conducts research and provides training and consulting services on the impact of information technology on human wellness. He's conducted 25 research studies on digital addictions with teens, college students, summer campers, and Michael did a class, I think it was it 2 years ago? About a year and a half ago, right in the middle of COVID, when he talked to us about digital addiction. He's spoken on smartphone addiction, and he's just worked with many companies everywhere. He's presented his research to U.S. Congressman Jim Jordan and Brad Wenstrup and his legislative staffs of several different other legislatures. He's interviewed on a variety of radio and TV shows. He holds a BA in psychology from Vassar, an MBA in marketing from the University of Michigan, and an MS in MIS from the University of Cincinnati. We please welcome our guest, Michael Mercier. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. I first started developing this talk back in May, and the reason I started to develop this talk is I was just at a point where I felt that the polarization that I'm sure we're all aware of, right, was in society was becoming really destructive, and I mean that on an individual interpersonal level. So like my sister in California won't speak to me on the phone. We just have to email, right? And I have so many friends that that have dumped me and that I can't speak with. So it's become very destructive on an interpersonal level, but then also on a societal level, because of this polarization, the media-driven polarization, we can't have a conversation about social problems and legislative issues. And what's basically happening is the news media is giving each side opposed facts. It's not just different facts, it's opposed facts. So if you want to talk about, with someone about, what we need to do to solve a problem, you can't do it. It's impossible because you're stuck debating the basic facts before you can talk about, well, do we need to solve this problem? If so, what should we do? So the debate should be around what should we do, not about what are the basic facts of the problem. So anyhow, so I have some insights about the news media. I won't bore you with the details, but I've been studying the news media since I was in business school in 1991. And then I worked at a newspaper and then a magazine, and then I got into the textbook business. And around 1996, one day I was listening to NPR and I got really mad about what I heard. So I picked up the phone and I called NPR and I got a switchboard, and they transferred me to Linda Wertheimer, which is who I asked for. And I was able to talk to her. And that was the beginning of a 30-year avocation of what I call media activism. So I do this kind of thing a lot. So I've gained a lot of insight, into the news media and how they work. So it's this insight that forms the basis of this talk. And what I'm going to go through is, first I want to sort of illustrate how we're polarized. So I want to give some examples of the polarization, the news narratives that polarize us. And then I want to explain, sort of illustrate how the news media is dividing us, how they're polarizing society. Then I'll walk through the problems this is causing. And finally, I'll lay out some solutions I feel that, if we empower ourselves, we can have some impact in our own lives to address. So how the media polarizes. I hope people can see the slides. But there are two basic ways that the news media goes about polarizing us. Number one, they publish polarized news narratives. Again, what I mean by that is they literally are saying the diametrically opposed things. So each side says the exact opposite of the other in terms of the facts of a certain issue. And then they demonize people on the other side. And if you look at Joy Reid's Twitter feed, you'll see what I'm talking about. So, but that's a big factor. I think the primary factor is the polarized news narratives. And then a secondary factor, which sort of builds on that, is the demonization of each side. It allows us to objectify each other and increases the polarization. So if you think about the way the parameters along which they polarize us, the most basic level is politically. So they polarize us politically. So we have liberal news outlets and conservative news outlets, and both of them are saying the opposite things. Sometimes they're aligned. So sometimes they're aligned. And then that leads to another dimension of polarization, which is polarization by the type of owner of the media outlet. So what we see usually, and it's usually a bad sign if left and right are in the mainstream media, if left and right news outlets are aligned, right? We know there's probably a problem. So we have the corporate mainstream media saying one thing, and then the independent and citizen journalists emerge to fill in the gap and to tell the truth that's not being told by them, right? So we end up getting a polarization along this dimension. So I'll be illustrating this as I go through the talk. So now I just want to, so that we're clear, right? I just want to walk through some polarized narratives that we've all experienced in the last couple of years. So you'll recognize these, but it's going to be interesting to see them juxtaposed. And you realize what they're really doing is putting us into different universes so we can't communicate. So hydroxychloroquine on the left, they cited research. There was research showing that it was ineffective and actually toxic or harmful, right? And then on the right, there was research saying it was highly effective and safe. So how can you have a conversation about hydroxychloroquine? It's really impossible. the reaction to George Floyd's death, right? That was hyperpolarized. So on the left, they characterized it as peaceful protests, and you've probably seen the famous video of, I think it was a CNN reporter standing in front of several burning buildings saying this is a peaceful protest, right? And on the right, the conservative media said they're violent riots, and they provided evidence of that too. We got the statistics from the insurance industry saying there have been $2 billion worth of damage from these events. 200 buildings were destroyed in Minneapolis alone. 20 deaths resulted from all of these peaceful protests. So again, it's impossible to have a conversation. This led to talking about Antifa, reporting on Antifa, and the conservative side, they began reporting about Antifa because they saw that they were attending these rallies and they felt that they were stoking the violence. So the right, the conservative media labeled Antifa a violent terrorist organization, while the left said, well, it's impossible. It's not an organization. It's just a written philosophy, and some people choose to follow it. It's really a fiction. And then Jerry Nadler, he's obviously not a journalist, but Jerry Nadler famously said it's a myth. Antifa's a myth. So again, we can't have a conversation about Antifa. Hunter Biden's laptop, right? It goes on and on. Russian disinformation, that's what John Brennan put a letter out saying. And on the right, they told us the FBI had the laptop. It was real. Tony Bobulinski came out and said, his emails were on the laptop. January 6th, violent insurrection. Actually, the violence was mostly provoked by the feds and Antifa. So it goes on and on. And this is the one example I want to give that shows the polarity between the mainstream and independent media. So when it came to ivermectin, the mainstream media sort of aligned and said ivermectin, the research is showing it's toxic and it's ineffective. And on the right, with the independent journalists, they were reporting, well, there are 63 studies from around the world showing it really works. And we have all these doctors who have tremendous success with it. So you see my point. It's impossible to have a conversation. Both sides end up just sort of like throwing up their hands thinking you're stupid, you're crazy, you're gullible if you believe what Fox or CNN tells you, and then we walk away. So, I want to sort of highlight how absurd this is by talking about what journalists are supposed to be doing. And I'll start with a definition of the purpose of journalism from the industry itself. So they tell us that the purpose of journalism is to provide citizens with the information they need to make the best possible decisions about their lives, their communities, their societies, and their governments. And a key word in here is citizens. So they're saying they're here to serve us, right? We're the customer. And if you think about it, just implicitly, if they're giving us opposed narratives, right? Different facts, if each side is getting a different set of facts and they say the polar opposite, right? Then they're clearly, someone's not telling the truth, right? And they can't be serving us. So we can all, I'm sure we all have a sense for who they're serving. There are other people that they're serving, right? Instead of us. They have a goal and it has very little to do with us. It has to do with other people. So they're serving these other entities and trying to convince us to take a certain position or have a certain viewpoint through the mechanisms that they use. The other key word in the definition is information, right? So the purpose of journalism is to provide citizens with the information they need. Well, they're clearly failing at that too, right? We're not getting the information we need. If we look at, when journalists talk about what kind of information are they supposed to provide, they're supposed to objectively present us with facts and the full set of facts, a complete set of facts. So they usually say the who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? So we're not getting that. Instead, they're actually literally using propaganda techniques. So some of those techniques on the left are fact related, right? So they give us some facts, some real facts, but they fabricate facts, they censor facts, they obfuscate or kind of hide facts, they distort facts, and they exaggerate. And then if if there's a voice out there that they can't censor, they can't quell, then they focus on the person. So they have person-related propaganda techniques. And what they'll do is they'll demonize, smear, dehumanize, discredit. And a good recent example of this was Joe Rogan and I don't know if you heard about this, but Joe Rogan and Dr. Malone, right? So the mainstream media had been effectively censoring Dr. Malone. So he only had a voice through independent media. And there were a lot of independent news outlets and citizen journalists giving him a voice that some people were able to access, right? But what he ended up doing is he did sort of an end run around the media by going on Joe Rogan's show. It was great that Joe did that. And he was able to get his voice and his viewpoint out to a mass audience, right? So all they could do at that point, the cat was out of the bag, all they could do was resort to demonizing him and Joe in order to discredit the information that they presented, right? So the bottom line is, to conclude here, the media isn't fulfilling their purpose, right? They're failing miserably, and it's probably, I don't think it's incompetence, it's intentional, right? But they're not fulfilling their purpose. Another way to sort of highlight how ridiculous this is to look at how they're supposed to do reporting. So to look at like the process of reporting. What does a journalist do? So this is a model I just put together just to lay it out. It's a process map. So a journalist gathers facts. They're supposed to gather facts. From the facts, produce a narrative, right? The narrative, the facts should dictate the narrative. And they issue a report. That's their work product. It's a report. And it goes out through a distribution channel, depending on what format they're working in. And it reaches the citizen or the end user. And if we just look at these briefly, the journalist's job, you can think about them having they usually have an area that they cover, a beat. And then they might cover a beat for like 3 years. It's a subject or a topic. And stories emerge. So they cover those stories. And it might be a one-day story like someone died, or it could be a 3-year story like the Mueller investigation, right? And as they cover a story, they put out reports. And this is an applied example. So a healthcare reporter probably covered in the last year COVID-19, the opioid crisis, cancer. And on the COVID-19, they did reports about deaths, about the vaccines, and about new variants. So that's the journalist's job, right? They're supposed to cover a certain subject area in this way. And they're supposed to gather, as we said, they're supposed to gather the facts, right? They gather facts, and then they develop a narrative. And I think there are a lot of definitions of a news narrative, but I think of it as it's a phrase that describes or frames or characterizes or summarizes the news, right? I think of it more as like a framing thing. And interestingly, I don't know if anyone's ever heard anyone talk about narratives or news narratives, but they often talk about like the meta narrative. They talk about layers of narratives, right? So there's a meta narrative, which is an overarching narrative. And that kind of mirrors the way that a reporter covers their beat, right? So CNN, right? A meta narrative or a beat level narrative for Donald Trump is that he's a horrible, self-centered narcissist who wants to be president just to increase his family's wealth, right? So that's like a meta narrative. And then every story that emerges is framed to support that meta narrative. And then if you look at the individual report that someone puts out, in a way, all 3 levels are sort of integrated, right? So CNN probably decided in 2015 that's how, if he wins, this is how we're gonna frame him. And this is a key point. This is like one of the key points of this presentation. If you think about it, if they're supposed to report facts, right? The facts should dictate the narrative. The narrative follows from the facts. But what's really happening is the narrative is dictating the facts. I'm sorry, I reverse it. So the facts should dictate the narrative, but what's happening today is the narrative is dictating the facts, right? And I'm not the only one to say this. So Barack Obama, he's talked about this a lot, right? I mean, this is not a rare insight, but he said, the information everyone receives is fractured and people form facts around their opinions rather than opinions around their facts. Well, he said people. if I were to rewrite that, I'd say the information everyone receives is fractured because journalists form facts around their narratives rather than narratives around the facts, right? So they're reversing the whole process because they have an agenda. And that's what's polarizing us. They're putting out these opposed narratives, right? It's the opposed narratives. And I don't, but you see my point. If you're going to develop the narrative or the story first, and then you want to make the facts in your report fit the narrative, you can't tell the truth. You can't tell the whole truth. You have to use propaganda techniques. So they're basically professional propagandists. The other thing I want to mention about narratives is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Darren Beatty, but he runs Revolver News, and I think he was a speechwriter for President Trump. But he mentioned this concept once in an interview about ossified narratives. So he talked about, I think it was January 6th. He was talking about how like the Democrats got the narrative out that this was, a coup attempt, right? With people armed with pepper spray were attempting a coup. And it was as serious, or it was like a terror attack, like on par with 9/11, right? And what Darren Beatty talks about how is if you get your narrative out early, it ossifies or it hardens, it becomes like bone, right? And then when new facts emerge to refute it, it's implanted and seared into the minds of the public, and you can't reverse it. And that's really what happened if you go back to hydroxychloroquine with President Trump. When the news media and the CDC started saying that this is ineffective and toxic, that was based upon just 2 studies. And then within weeks, they were found to be fraudulent, and the journals that published them retracted them. But that story that this is not effective and it's actually harmful became an ossified narrative, right? So half the country still views it that way, even though those studies were fraudulent. I already mentioned the Joe Rogan example. So they generate a report, and then it goes out through the distribution channel. Just briefly with the distribution channel, you can think about the way they polarize those 2 parameters I mentioned. That's essentially how you can segment the distribution channels. We have liberal and conservative news outlets, and then we also have corporate mainstream and independent and citizen journalists. I want to mention something because if you talk to a librarian like 10 or 15 years ago, librarians teach information literacy, digital literacy, and news literacy. And what they would have told you, what they're telling students is, always go to, when you're on the internet, always go to trusted sources like Time Magazine, the New York Times, NBC, right? And in the last 5 years, since this polarization became so, intense, that's really not true. There are all kinds of independent news outlets and independent and citizen journalists that have emerged, right? And they have, in my opinion, far more credibility right now than the mainstream outlets, and they really need to be, supported, in my opinion, and listened to and relied upon. And what you see is there are 2 types of citizen journalists. There are people who will work as journalists long term, right, as citizen journalists. So like Darren Beatty, who I mentioned, who has Revolver News, he's going to be like a long-term permanent citizen journalist. But there are others who emerge to address an urgent issue in the short term, and I think we've seen that with COVID, right? There are all these MDs and PhDs who have emerged, right? Like Dr. Malone, or Dr. I forget the other guy's name, McCullough. Yeah, so I'm thinking like Dr. McCullough will probably recede, right? After he rose to the occasion, he emerged because there was a need that he saw, and he's become like a citizen journalist, but he'll probably recede. So I just want to make it clear that there'll probably be other crises in the future that emerge, and other people might step up and be citizen journalists for a period of time and then recede. And then the report goes out to the citizen. And this is my observation. From what I can see, there are 2 types of recipients of news. On the top, there are the single news type. So these are the people who get the news from either left or right, mainstream media sources. So for a liberal, for example, they might just watch CNN and read the New York Times. And on the right, they might just watch Fox and read the Wall Street Journal, right? And then the second type, the type 2, they get the news from all types, all categories of news outlets. They're the people that realize that this polarization is going on. So they're the people that realize that they're not getting the truth. They're not getting the full set of facts from the mainstream news outlets. So what they do, it's like a daily habit. They'll look at left and right, and then they'll go to both independent and citizen journalists. So that's been my observation. It's either if you don't realize this is happening, you're type 1. If you do, you start going to all sources. And I would include in that a critical one, the last one I list there, primary sources, right? So this second type, they also tend to go to primary sources and read the primary source and come to their own judgment. So an example of that for me was when the Mueller report came out, the liberal news was saying, well, Mueller concluded that President Trump colluded with Russia. And on the right, they were saying, no, he didn't. And I just went to the Mueller report, and it's page 5 or 6 of the executive summary. He clearly said there was no evidence that anyone in the campaign colluded with Russia. So that's what I mean, like going to primary sources. So just to conclude this part of the presentation. So I've redrawn this map, and this is like the reality. This is like a picture of the polarization. So we've really got 2 separate processes going on. They're mutually exclusive, the top and the bottom. And instead of the journalist gathering facts and then developing a narrative, the journalist is developing a narrative and then putting the report out through a liberal, on the top, it's through a liberal distribution channel to reach a liberal citizen. And on the bottom, the same is taking place with conservatives. And then we see a similar process with the corporate mainstream and the independent and citizen journalist polarization. The only difference is the independent and citizen journalists actually follow that, have high integrity, and they look at the facts first and then develop their narrative. So again, what I've tried to illustrate here is that these are 2 ways of looking at the process of reporting, right? And identifying or seeing or becoming aware of how it's failing, right? How we're getting to this point where we have this massive polarization. Now I want to talk about how it harms us. And at the individual level, the first thing I would say is it deprives us of a total set of facts, right? The second thing is it really divides us into mutually exclusive realities. We're really in different planets, which is why we can't have a conversation with the other side. So yeah, number 3, it makes political dialogue impossible. And then number 4, it antagonizes us from family and friends. I'm just guessing I've lost probably 10 friends over the last few years. Good friends, who won't have anything to do with me. And I want to go back to Barack Obama. I have this one for a politically mixed audience, okay? So, but he said the same thing. We live in such a polarized time. If you watch Fox News, you're in one reality. And if you read the New York Times, you're in a different reality. And if you're at BuzzFeed, you're someplace else. It's been challenging to have a common conversation. So Barack Obama, he recognizes what's going on here, And then at the societal level, I would say it's destructive of democracy because we don't have a fully informed citizenry. So when people aren't fully informed, generally speaking, if our citizenry isn't fully informed, then we can't engage in productive political discourse, and we can't adequately vet proposed policy. Right? It gives them more. They're not being vetted. We're not vetting the policies. So in some ways, this polarization is really beneficial to whatever party's in power, whichever party has the majority. And this just illustrates what I said earlier. So this is the problem. We've got, if you think about this is how we debate policy. On the bottom, we just have to determine, okay, what are the facts here? What's the situation? Then the debate begins above that, right? is this really a problem? Does it constitute a problem? Is it bad enough that it needs to be addressed? And then how should we address it? But we can't ascend that pyramid because we get caught up on the bottom debating the facts, and then we just give up. It's impossible to move forward. Let me put it this way. What I tell friends of mine is, say for example, regarding the 2020 election, right? I was fed on my side information. I probably consumed 2 hours of information every day for 3 or 4 months, right? About election fraud, right? So this was like a very long, in-depth process, right? So it might take me 80 hours to walk a liberal friend through what I went through to come to the conclusion that I've come to, right? If you look at what the liberals were told, and I listen to NPR every morning, so they just have cliches that they use. They just have phrases that they throw out that everyone uses, and they basically say, President Trump's unsubstantiated claims of election fraud. So what they're saying is they're hiding from their audience the fact that it was actually thousands of citizens who witnessed and reported the fraud under penalty of perjury, right? Not President Trump, right? So they're hiding that whole, that elaborate side of this from their audience, right? And because of that, like I said, for so many of these issues, I'd have to spend 20 hours with my friends walking them through what I've been told to have a discussion. So it's essentially impossible. So I'm going to quickly run through some headlines, and then I'll get to the final part of the presentation, which is the solutions. But in some ways, I wanted to say, like, this is breaking down, right? Things are fracturing, and we're seeing a lot of signs that things might have to change for the mainstream media. There's some headlines that I think reflect this. So this was a study, an international poll done last summer, and the US ranked last among 46 countries in their trust in the media. And if you look at the subheadline, it said only 29% of people surveyed in the US said they trust the news, whereas in Canada, 45% trust the news, and in Brazil, 54% trust the news, right? So that's, ratings are falling for a lot of these organizations, right? So this was a headline, CNN's ratings dived by 90% of their 2021 coverage, right? Retracting reports, right? Because they lied. So we've seen retractions. Journalists had to leave CNN, surprisingly, because they had to retract their reports. They lied. Washington Post had to correct a report. You might remember this. This was a local TV Fox News reporter in Texas, and she was going to the hospital, and she had interviewed these very high-level, established, internationally known doctors who were treating patients with hydroxychloroquine. And she'd interview them and put together these reports, and Fox wouldn't play the report, right? So she basically outed them on air. So she was doing a report here, and she said, "Oh, by the way," and she outed them, and then she got fired, and then she released the audio recordings she discussed with their boss, where they say, "No, we can't cover this. The station manager doesn't want to do it, and other people don't hire above him." So, and the lawsuits, right? So Nick Sandmann is doing pretty well with his lawsuits. NBC, what was that? The Post, NBC, CNN. I wanted to mention this. This is another sign, I feel, that there's a problem. And I'm a fan of Sean Hannity, but if you recall, the January 6th committee put out text message he sent to, was it McEnany? And it's, in my opinion, this is unacceptable. He actually was ordering her. He was like giving her orders, like, do this. If you look at some of the texts, and she said, okay. So there needs to be some objectivity here, and there's supposed to be distance. Reporters are supposed to have some distance from the politicians they cover. So you know, this is, I feel, somewhat of a problem. Same thing with Tucker Carlson. He felt, I guess he has a great enough relationship with President Trump that he just drove down to Mar-a-Lago to meet with him to make sure he's going to take the COVID-19 seriously. So I'm a huge fan of Tucker, but I just want to highlight this. This is unacceptable, and I think it's a sign of the polarization and, you know, the problem of the lack of objectivity. This is a great example. So this is from the 2016 election. You remember John Podesta, Hillary's campaign manager. His emails were hacked, and then WikiLeaks released them, and then they released, I think, thousands of them every day for like the 30 days leading up to the 2016 election. And I pulled this one, and you might remember what a lot of the emails showed was the close collaboration between the campaign and the news media. So remember, Donna Brazile fed a debate question to Hillary so she could prepare for it, right? Well, this is Glenn Thrush at Politico, and he basically emailed his article to John Podesta for like approval. And he said, because I've become a hack, I will send you the whole section that pertains to you. Please don't share or tell anyone I did this. And you think, so this was leaked, right? And what would you think would happen to a reporter who did this? You think they get fired, right? Within, I think, 2 months, he got a huge promotion. The New York Times hired him, right? So they said, like, he has no integrity. He's a hack and a slimeball. We need this guy, right? So he got this big promotion. And then this is another example. Kyle, I'm a little confused about what Kyle's doing, but he just announced a couple of days ago that he's going to sue the people that slandered him. But it sounded like he's also setting up an organization that might also sue media outlets for other lies that have nothing to do with him. But you see my point. There are fractures here, and the combination of these things could put pressure on these mainstream outlets to develop some journalistic integrity, you know, and correct what they're doing, or at least move in the other direction toward more integrity. So now, in terms of solutions, there are three general things I want to, you know, suggest you consider as an individual trying to address this problem. So the first thing is, how do we find the truth? The original title of this talk was Working Around the News Media to Find the Truth. So that's really what we have to do. It's what I mentioned before. It's that type 2 news consumer that I mentioned. So make a daily habit of consuming news from both liberal and conservative, mainstream and independent news outlets. And I know that might sound like a lot, but if, you know, I'm not saying you spend an extra hour a day on the news, but if you just start to sample on a daily basis, if there's a big issue or a big news report, something big happened, you know, you could do it that way. Just sample, find some independent news outlets, a liberal outlet, and then what you'll do is, over time, if you do this over time, repeatedly over time, what you're going to do is you're going to learn the general tendencies of each. You're going to become a really effective news analyst, essentially. But you'll learn the tendencies, like their viewpoints, their narratives. You'll start to see patterns, right? What they censor, what they don't censor, what they, you know, their fabrications, their smears, et cetera. And what we're doing here is we're identifying factual discrepancies. So you'll see one side said this and the other side didn't say this. They didn't mention that, right? So you find discrepancies. And then this is what I do. I do research to reconcile the discrepancies. And then I go to primary sources whenever I can and come to my own conclusion. And the second thing we can do to try to address this problem is bridge this polarized divide that we experience in our individual lives. And the main thing I would suggest here, to me, it's just trying to wake up other people to the fact that they're not getting the whole story. If they're one of those people that just relies on CNN and the New York Times, to try to awaken them to the fact that they are not getting the whole story, that they're being lied to some degree, and you know, awaken them to this polarization. Like, you're in a different world than people over here are, right? And you really should think about investigating this and seeing if you can awaken to the problem this is causing us. So I would say share these insights with other people. That's number one. Number two, you could share news items with people that challenge the news they're receiving. If it's like a key issue they're interested in, send them an article from the other side or from an independent journalist that will tell them something totally different. Share primary sources with others. I found that that's pretty effective. And then challenge them to do their own analysis and generate their own conclusions. That is a tendency I've found with people who don't do this. They tend to almost passively accept the assessment or judgment that they're being told from the news outlet instead of thinking about it critically. And then how do we hold the news media accountable? This is what I mentioned earlier, the thing I've been doing for 30 years, which is news media activism. That's what I call it. And I understand this is like a hobby for me. So I understand not everyone's going to want to do this or do it to the extreme that I do, but it's like an avocation for me. So I enjoy it. So, challenge the reporters. If you catch them lying or censoring, challenge them or distorting the truth. You can also challenge their expert guests. So it doesn't just have to be the journalists, they have experts on or commentators, right? Those people can be challenged, as well as people who aren't experts, but they're on for whatever reason. There's some kind of witness or a guest, right? And you can make phone calls, do it through email, social media, or you could mail a letter, but I doubt you do that. The thing with social media, so after doing so much of this, what I found is it's often easier to get to guests, right? If it's like a professor or something, right? You can reach out to them easily, just look up their email address and they'll often respond. Trying to reach people at NBC or CBS or CNN, that's going to be difficult. Trying to reach them, if they're at these major outlets, trying to get them through social media is difficult. So I think it's going to be easier with local media. I have tended to focus on NPR because I've been a daily listener since 1986. And I get up very early, so I start listening at 5 a.m. to their morning edition show, right? And you, as I mentioned, you used to be able to call. This was interesting. You used to be able to, initially you'd call, like in the 90s, you'd call and you'd get a receptionist and they'd transfer you. And they never screened the calls. So you'd always get through to someone, and you could leave them a voicemail if you didn't reach them. I've had NPR journalists call me back, or I've emailed them and they've replied and given me their phone number. And we've had phone calls. But then they started having, at some point they had an automated system. But interestingly, a few weeks after the 2020 election, they shut it down. So you can call, but there's no way to transfer to anyone. So now, since then, I've been relying on email. And I'll give you just quickly a couple of examples of successes I've had. And I put WVXU at the top because I know it's local, right? So it was Christmas, probably 10 years ago, and I actually put NPR on. And have you heard of that show, This American Life? It's a Ira Glass. It's a very popular, massively syndicated radio show that NPR carries, and Ira Glass is like this NPR celebrity. So they broadcast, and VXU broadcast his Christmas show, and I'm sorry, have I gone over? I'm almost done. I just want to give two examples. So NPR was broadcasting his Christmas show, and he was basically criticizing Christmas. He's making a joke out of it. And he had this one segment where the characters, it was basically Jesus being upset in a contemporary setting because he knocked up his girlfriend. And I was just out of my mind angry. And I was raised a Catholic, but I'm not a practicing Christian anymore. But I ended up calling VXU and I transferred to the president and I left a message. I'm like, I'm all for free speech, but if you did this for any other religion on a religious holiday, I mean, it just wouldn't fly. It's unacceptable. And then I emailed the president of NPR, the national president, and she replied and she copied Ira Glass. And she said, well, you can talk to Ira about it. And then from VXU, I got a call back like the following week from the marketing director. And she said, yeah, we were offended by this too. So she said, we're not going to play his show on Christmas anymore, right? So this is like a little success, but I've had other Mara Eliason, I've had her actually change some of her reporting based upon information I gave to her. David Green, he's another NPR anchor. I actually got him to do a report based on the email I sent him. I actually suggested that he was in sort of a fantasy land with his reporting, ignoring the fact that we had a recession going on back in 2008. And I said, you really need to hit the road and like talk to people. There's serious problems here, So he did that. He went on the road and he actually used some of the language from my email in the reporting. Last summer, I actually caught an NPR journalist censoring the archive of one of her reports and challenged her on that. It's someone who I had an email relationship with. She was very responsive over months. I got NPR to actually initiate research on ivermectin, and they eventually dissed it, but they did start researching it. So anyhow, so that's it. I don't know if we have gone over. I'm just not clear. But if there's time for questions, I could take them, or if anyone has any comments or ideas.
Who's got a question? Right here.
My name is Ted Day. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, that was an excellent presentation. I really thought about that, but you gave me words to think about it. My problem is like I'm a Trump supporter, but a lot of my family is just on the opposite side.
Right.
And when I look at what they see, they're watching CNN all the time, I would agree with them. I mean, the way they twist everything on CNN and ABC and CBS, and it's just I would agree with them that why are they so able to twist things around to be so negative? And I was thinking, Trump is really preaching to the choir all the time, but he'll never reach these people that are watching CNN and ABC. So I guess there's no solution really for the president to change people's minds, because they will never. Even today, I was talking with a family member, and he was saying it was all Trump's fault with the Ukraine situation. He should have done something. He should have done something 4 years ago.
Right.
But I mean, they're twisted. What they see is what they believe, and they see it every day, and so they believe all this stuff.
Right. No, this is a very good point.
Hi, I'm Dennis. One of the things I've wondered, and I wonder if you've looked into this at all, is it strikes me with a lot of these news outlets that they don't really care about subscriber retention anymore. And I'm wondering if there's more money coming from other sources of income, basically in terms of mapping the populace, or,
Right.
basically persuasion, analytics and that sort of thing. How do you get control back to the subscriber again?
Yeah, that's a good point. I have no idea if they have other sources, unless they're just directly taking money from people to write reports in a certain way. I don't know. It's a good question.
We have a question here.
Jeff, one kind of criticism I would have of conservative news is I think we need primary source information to present to our liberal friends, and we don't get that from conservative news and from conservative sources. Like with election fraud in Arizona, I've been dying to hear some primary source information of exactly what they've found so far, and you just can't get that. So you don't have the primary source information. Both our children are libs, and there's no discussing anything because my son listens to NPR. He's listened to NPR ever since he started college,
Right.
or high school. And so, but if I had some primary source information,
Excuse me.
these are the facts.
Excuse me. Would you define primary source?
Primary source would be, well, I mentioned like the Mueller report, right? So primary source is really, if a news outlet is giving for example, Tucker Carlson, right? If he did a report on the vaccine injuries, right? And NPR did a report on his report on vaccine injuries, and they totally distorted what he said. They actually said he said the opposite of what he said, right? So going to the primary, so instead of listening to to the 20-second clip that NPR played in the report to say, this is what Tucker said, you could go to the
Tucker.
entire 15-minute segment, right? It was a 15-minute segment, and listen to what he said. So anytime there's a reference or they're reporting on some document or, piece of information that you can try to access,
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Just was wondering if you see that as part of the issue, that there's not enough primary source information provided to the public that we can use to fight the liberal point of view.
I actually find a lot of it. I'm able to find a lot of primary source information. I agree with you. It was tough to get information on the audit, and I don't understand why. But I've actually found if you look for it, you can find it. And like I said, especially I find the independent news sources, like this Revolver News he's phenomenal. Everything is documented with links. Everything he writes, every article is right. It's just filled with links. He documents every statement he's making. It's Darren Beatty, Beattie, and he appears. He's often on Steve Bannon's show, and he started going on Alex Jones' show too.
Other questions? Oh, we've got a question online in the back.
For those of us who have very limited time to take in the news, what sources would you recommend?
Well, I mean, I really do hesitate to recommend sources, but I'll tell you what I do. I mean, I get my liberal news from NPR every morning, and then I will listen to clips of Tucker Carlson on YouTube. And I personally feel that if you're going to watch news, right, rather than read it, I think Steve Bannon has the best show of any that I've ever seen. The information, he has a daily show and he archives it so you can watch it at night, but it's like 10 to 12 and then 5 to 6. And it's absolutely the best show, the best news source I have. For print news or, text news, articles, I actually rely on Gateway Pundit a lot. And then I'll skip over to Breitbart and, I'll look at Alex Jones actually, and some others. But Gateway Pundit is the main one I look at.
Here's a question right here.
Jan, the liberals have a success factors that they use. They have a strategic plan that they stick to. The conservatives don't. They tend to sometimes get into debating themselves and fighting amongst them as to what the issues really are. Have you seen that in any of the information that you've gathered?
I don't know, and I will tell you, I'm from Massachusetts. I grew up in Boston. I was a registered independent, and I voted for Nader in 2000, and I voted for Obama in 2008. Okay, so my point is that I've been on both sides. It was after 2008 that I realized Obama was a fraud, and I started to migrate to the right. But I've seen both sides, and my perspective on the difference between the two, what shocked me is that with conservatives, there's a core philosophy that everything's grounded in, and it's the Constitution. I mean, that's like the essence. There's a written document you can go to, So everything is intellectually.
Is that called the primary source, right?
I guess, yeah. But everything is intellectually rationalized, right? Everything is intellectually analyzed and thought through and rationalized, and it follows from the idea of freedom, right? And the Constitution. And when I look at the left, I mean, having been all my life mostly, except for the last 8 years, right? There's nothing solid there. I mean, I can't point to a philosophy. So my view is that people, philosophically, the right is far more grounded and I think consistent. You see the division between, this new MAGA movement and the rhinos, right? So clearly there's a big difference between them. But if you look at the MAGA people, to me, it's just grounded in freedom and the Constitution. And to me, it seems more consistent. In terms of game plan, you're talking about the game plan, right? I guess. I don't know. Someone else might have comments on that. I really don't.
We've got time for one last question right over here. Pardon me.
My name is Martha. Mine is more of a comment. Maybe we need some guidance. I'd like to see the right get control of the narrative. I mean, when did honest elections with voter ID become voter suppression?
Right. Right. I think the rights and control, you know, if you look at that separation, the rights and control of the narrative on the right, but not on the left. Yeah. So my last comment is I feel like these news media outlets, they know that their core audiences don't look at other sources. That's the other thing. They know that they have them and they can just tell them anything, you know? So you're highlighting this polarization that I'm talking about. Yeah.
Let's thank our guests. What a great presentation. So easy to follow. Thank you so much. I don't know if we can put that up on our website.
Sure.
It was just so well done. The way
It's a little boring. But
no, I thought it
slides,
was
but
right
I'm happy
on. Just 3 quick things I want to leave you with tonight. Does anybody listen to this show in the morning called The Morning Wire? It's 15 minutes. It's from the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro's group. It gives you 15 minutes of news in the morning first thing, and I really like it if I'm driving. It's very they talk about all sorts of things. Try that too. So 2 things. So Jennifer Gross, we could just keep having her come back and back and back and back and back, because one thing she and I talked about, which is really interesting, it doesn't sound like it, but it is, and that is the way the government stifles individuals with licensing regulations. And for instance, makes people who want to braid hair or go to school for some, how long do they have to go to school for? But she's working on a bill for that. It's really interesting. So we'll bait her on that to come back to empower you sometime. And let's give Jennifer a round of applause again too. I just want to thank the team. I've got Bill Roll, our great treasurer in the back. Let's give him a round of applause. We've got Betty Overstreet, our executive directors in the back. Give her a round of applause. John O'Neill, who handles our Take 20 guests. Let's give him a round of applause. Jay, who's on the board tonight. Let's give him some applause. And we've got our newest member of our team, Leanne, who's kind of helping Betty and I in the background with tons of stuff. And she's helping on the board tonight. Let's give Leanne a round of applause too. Thank you everyone for joining us online tonight. And remember, Tuesday night, virtual session. If you want to step out of your comfort zone, join us. It'll be a lot of fun. And thank you. Have a good night, everybody. And thanks again to Michael. Let's give Michael a round of applause. Thank you.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I was a little nervous.
No, you were
I
fantastic.
thought the slides were boring. I thought
No,
no pictures, you know.
No, you were fantastic.